Dr. Carter. This information has just been so wonderful. You have taken us to so many intersections and given us a lot to really think about, because I don't know that we've thought um, this deeply about food and these intersections of race and faith in the way that you have shown us. And so we are grateful to you and grateful for your scholarship and how you have explained all of this. A couple of things came to mind for me as I was listening and thinking about what you were sharing, and then looking at a couple of the comments in the chat, and that is food obviously connects us, but in a way it also separates us. And so in your book, you talk about how food is a griot, it's a storyteller. And you've certainly shared that during this lecture. And so I'm wondering, as we think from the African American perspective, and especially in our churches, we know there's, fish fries. We know that on Sundays after church, a lot of times we're gathering in the fellowship hall, and it's a time of coming together for soul food eating. And so what would you say is a way that the church can begin to sort of reframe what soul food looks like in a way that is more healthy and soulful, as you talk about?
So one of the things I did, I'll get a chance to look at the chat, and I can stay on later if y'all are interested to answer some of these questions. The beautiful thing I can say is every argument that I make in the book, part of the reason the book took 10, almost 12 years to put together is because I wanted to actually put it in a practice. And so I'm not asking y'all to do anything I haven't actually done or witnessed people doing. And so what I did that I thought was really effective. Now, I also should be clear, at this time, I was the pastor of a church, which is different because there's a different power structure as a Black pastor. I cooked this food. Like, I remember the first time, I think I tell the story a little bit in the book, when I made my citrus raisins and collard greens, which is not obviously the way people usually eat collard greens, right? That with orange juice and raisins. But I think what happened was people in my church ate them. Maybe in the beginning, they ate them because I made them and they wanted to humor me. But what actually turned out to be one of the things that was requested almost because we had potlucks on first Sunday of the month, every first Sunday, among that and many other things in the 2 years I was at this church in Compton, was I think this can't be done. This isn't something that's forced. This is something you have to do by persuasion and by modeling it. And so I think letting our diets evolve by getting books by people like Brian Terry, who's an amazing Black vegan chef, who talks about, and with his text, I think this book's do a great job of tying into those identities of Black Southern cooking and Caribbean cooking, and recognizing that it's not always full of meat. And this requires a reconstitution, I think, of what our projected assumptions of what goes into those plates. I'm fortunate enough to have a grandfather that's still alive, as I mentioned earlier. And talking to him about his diet growing up, it wasn't like he ate meat with every meal. That's a very Midwestern way or not Midwestern, American way of thinking, but also a kind of class way of thinking. And so when I think about how food divides us, actually, class plays a huge part in this with respect to Black people, especially. Like, class really matters in here in terms of the cultural assumptions we have around food. And I think that tends to be one of the bigger challenges, is people feel like you're acting white if you eat a certain kind of way, right? And what I'm arguing, and that's part of the reason I talk about reclaiming the culinary and agricultural history of our African ancestors. So like, if you actually talk to people or visit people, many of us don't have the opportunity to visit. I've not been to the continent yet, but the Africans that I do know and I've been able to work with and talk to via Zoom, right? The diets are not the ways in which we tend to imagine them to be, right? That there is a way in which they eat that's way more greens than we eat, right? And so I think this requires us to, that's why I talk about decolonizing. It really is a reclaiming of this wisdom that is our wisdom, that we have to see as ours, and not as something is white. Healthy eating can't just be this white way of eating. I think that's part of the white hegemonic imagination.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. One of the comments says one of the reasons why soul food is still an attraction to the Black community, because it is cheaper than healthy foods. And then someone else came along and said, but is soul food always unhealthy and cheap? And that feels like a stereotype or maybe a narrow definition of soul food.
That's such a great question. In part, and I want to answer this pre-COVID inflation of the last year. I do want to say that my answer is going to be because inflation, food inflation right now is just crazy. And the prices we pay for things in California is different because literally so much of the food in America has grown, 200 miles away from where I live right now. But with that as a caveat, many of the foods I would say that constitute soul food are not necessarily, they're artificially made cheap through the ways in which we structure the farm bill and those subsidies I talked about earlier. But not actual, like, it's the pre-made stuff that's cheap, the stuff that's full of preservatives, the things that are already pre-made and ready-made, those kinds of things are cheap. But the kinds of things I grew up eating, I grew up eating red beans and rice. We have jambalaya or gumbo or any of the kinds of things, or even if we just had, chicken or okra, especially, those things aren't expensive as much as the issue is access, right? That becomes the issue. And that's where I think food apartheid is really important. I happen to grow up in, again, semi-rural West Michigan. We didn't have food access problems that much because we were around farms. It wasn't until we moved to the city where we had much more food access problems because we didn't live anywhere near a grocery store that carried produce that was good enough, that looked good enough for us to buy. And so I think that is a part of the issue that we have actually is access. Cost is some of the challenges, but also the last thing I should say is time. So many Black families have to work, so many jobs, they don't have time to prepare. And so this is why when we talk about this being an interconnected issue where we have to talk about wages, we really need to talk about actually paying people a living wages. People actually have time to cook, right? And time to prepare, and actually time to just rest, right? And not have to work. And my mother grew up working, she worked 3 jobs. So much of my life, she worked 3 jobs just to be able to afford to survive, for us to be able to afford to survive. And that's not sustainable. And so I know my solutions aren't like, oh, do this one thing. Maybe this is part of the ADHD that I have, but I see these things as deeply interconnected. And so if you're down for food justice, but you're really focused on economic aspects of it, that's awesome, right? Do that. That's what gets you excited, because we need people doing that work too.
Yeah. Thank you for that. So let me see if there are other questions here in the chat. And if anybody has a question that you have not yet placed in the chat, if you want to unmute yourself and feel like it's easier for you to ask the question verbally rather than writing it in the chat, please feel free to do that. So let me pause here and see if anyone wants to come from being unmuted to ask a question.
Hi, this is Tammy. I did want to ask a question.
Yes.
It's so hard to fight every single battle. And I I know that I heard what you said. I learned a lot of new things today. But sometimes can't we just enjoy something? Can't we just say, yeah, it started out this way. Yeah, it, sometimes is not the greatest thing. But there are so many times in life that we have to do things. We have to go to work. We have to pay bills. Sometimes we have to bite our tongue because we have so many microaggressions. Why can we not just say, I want to eat that? I want to enjoy that and not feel guilt about it's colonialism or, everybody is not unhealthy. And sometimes people will say, well, obesity is this, and I'm a registered nurse and I know, we all want to say, well, everybody's obese and everybody is this. Yes, there is obesity, but not everyone has diabetes. Not everyone has hypertension. Not everybody is at risk for all of these diseases. Yes, a large part of our society is, but when you are fighting so much all the time, and if that brings you a little bit of joy, then what's wrong with it?
Yeah, no, thank you, Tammy, for such an amazing point. That's an excellent observation. And hopefully I was clear. I don't want anybody to feel like and I didn't talk enough in this lecture about compassion. As I talk about in the book, I start the book on compassion. Every chapter ends literally where I talk about compassion, because this is exhausting. as you said, this is exhausting. Like, and this is not a book about blaming, shaming, or judging anybody for what they eat, right? I grew up on food stamps without access to food and ate things that were not healthy, and I deal with the health consequences of that today, right? And it wasn't anybody's fault. Well, it's, you know, racism structurally, but like, it wasn't my mom's fault, right? In that sense. And so the other thing I also want to note too is that I think because we're in a time of a pandemic, I think we have to be really serious about and aware of the ways in which that impacts us too, in terms of what we actually can take on. What I would suggest is everybody can't do everything, but I do believe all of us should do something with respect to food injustice. And for me, Tammy, quite honestly, what I struggle with is, if I eat these things, how does it impact others, right? I guess two things I should struggle with. If I eat these things, what impact does it have on others, other people beyond me, right? And then secondly, right, what alternative, how might I find other ways of allowing myself to feel centered and nurtured in the midst of that? Because I would argue part of the reason that we feel as though that we have to have these, now say have to have, I think we exist in a society that causes us to be so burnt out and so exhausted, especially as people of color, because we have to fight so many battles, that literally is what's killing us, right? There's an amazing research done by a woman at the University of Michigan called, her name is Arlene Geronimus, and she basically makes the argument, to your point, that the primary reason we have hypertension, diabetes, and other issues really can be traced back to racism, in the ways in which racism harms our bodies. Like, literally, the racism is killing us, not the food. The racism that we deal with is killing us. And so, yes, I think we do need to find joy and pleasure and find things to do that give us joy and that pleasure. My invitation is to find other things that give us joy and pleasure, if you can, and as you can. And that takes time. It takes some kind of creativity. I think, and it doesn't have to be done all at once, right? It can be done one meal a week, but it's a process. My journey to my diet changing took probably 6 or 7 years. So this wasn't something that happened overnight. So hopefully you don't feel like I was blaming, shaming you, or judging you, or anything like that. It really was just an invitation for us to kind of think critically about what the history of this came from and how we might evolve.
No, Dr. Carter, you gave a great talk. That was just a question. That's like a burning question with every time I hear one of these discussions. So let me just say, I volunteer extensively. I've volunteered for the last 10 years, and I tell people, I know the world is going in flames, but I drink I drink bottled water. So I try to do other things. I mentor all the time, even though I don't have children, and I make up for it in other ways that I drink so much bottled water. So no, it was not, it wasn't anything that you said. I thought you gave a great discussion, and it's very enlightening about how to connect all of these things. I just wanted, to ask that question, because sometimes I think people miss that, that they are wanting you to just change overnight and just, it's okay. Some people, like I said, everybody doesn't have hypertension. Everybody does not have diabetes. And I do think it's true. I don't think it's the food that's killing everyone. I do think it's the racism. So thank you for listening. Thank you for your response.
Yeah, well, before we call on Sarah, one thing I want to say really, really quickly, and just response to what Tammy said, I just remembered. A lot of the idea we have about purity and this notion that we have to do things perfectly and be pure comes from this is really, I would say, a form of white supremacy and white supremacist thinking, that of this idea that we have to be this perfect way to be seen as participating in something. And I could dive more into that, but this notion of purity is just BS. Like, if I go to a conference, I have to fly on a plane, right? These are the kinds of compromises that we're making. So none of us are in this without having to make some compromises. And the last thing I want to say, and this is especially true for all the women in this space, is who is caring for you? Because there's so much more that's put upon women to care for others, particularly as it relates to food. And so that's one thing I talk about in the book that I don't talk about here, is hopefully you're in a space where someone is taking the time to really that you have a community of folks who are really trying to also care for you, so you don't feel burdened and burnt out. Because the only way we're going to survive through this is through community care, not through self-care, right? People who actually, you can come to someone and say, man, I need some help today. I need you. And then someone is willing to step up and also be present when someone, and also when you have more to give, be willing to help out as well. So that's the last thing I want to say, because this is particularly important, I think, for women, because those are the folks who I think who get marginalized the most with respect to food.
Thank you for that. We appreciate that, Dr. Carter. Absolutely. So yes, let's turn to my friend, Sarah. Sarah, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Thanks, Wabette. Dr. Carter, thank you so much for your scholarship. This was truly eye-opening. I am a regenerative farmer in North Texas, which is something that we have discovered, we're passionate about, and we try to see the cows and sheep and chickens and the dogs as co-workers. It's not egalitarian, it's as you say, but it is an attempt to be more holistic and earth friendly. And we're not experts. We try and be, we're passionate, but we try to be humble, that we don't have the right way, the only way. So I want to say that I have sometimes gotten frustrated with some of my vegan friends who are militant in a purity kind of, this is the only way. And so when I was excited to get your book, on the first page, I saw Black vegan. I thought, oh no, but I'm glad I stuck it out. Your generosity of, we're all at different places. We're all in different contexts, but I think we all can and must agree that factory farms are an abomination, and we need to encourage each other to participate and find new ways to have healthier food systems. But we've got to add the race filter, because you have helped me to see some things more clearly, and so I appreciate the growing edge.
Sarah, thank you so much for saying that. And you see, I put the heart emoji up because my hope is that people can get through that first couple of pages, if they maybe have encountered militant vegans, because that's just not who I am, because that's not how that's not the community I came from. It's not the community that I still am around. And I think, to be honest, one of the things I don't talk about in the book, but I started thinking about these things when I became a pastor. And it is before I even started thinking critically about the environment. And again, this is a very Methodist way of thinking about, taking a pledge to do no harm. Mm-hmm. Like, I took a vow, and it just, I was like, man, I'm to what extent does that go beyond human beings? Right. And I think that already started pushing me that way and thinking that way. But I believe, that we all are, I'm a Christian, so I believe we're all created by God, and that this hierarchy does exist. But the challenge that we have, that God has conferred upon human beings, is to not be oppressive with the power that we've been given. How can we create a non-oppressive hierarchy? And so that requires us to be co-workers, as you said, with non-human nature, to see it as having a distinct role and value and purpose, but not one that we can exploit. And I think that's a challenge within this framework that we live, as you pointed out. And so, yes, I want to be invitational in that way and inspire people to think critically about how we can do the work you're doing, while also thinking about the role of race and being mindful of the role of the animal, right? In ways that don't actually lead to the kind of exploitative thinking that I suggest and argue, which it sounds like you're doing. So your compliment actually carries a lot of weight with me, because my hope is that people who are farmers will read this and not be too angry. And so thank you for sticking it out. Thank you.
I'm glad I did.
Thank you. We've got another question. Paula, do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yes, thank you. And I really appreciate this presentation. And I was sort of curious about this idea about intersectionality, and I appreciated you commenting about the role of Black women, particularly the role of Black women as it applies to both food and food issues and church issues. And as somebody who's a 67-year-old Black woman, I've sort of been observing this for a number of years. And part of what I find challenging is we have an organic garden in the rear of our church. It's not a farm, it's only 5,000 square feet. But we have an on-site farmers market where we sell the produce that we grow and that we get from other farmers for $1 a pound. So we address this issue of access, but we also address this issue of time and learning how to prepare this food. But it is a struggle to me when I see this disconnection between what we know historically about how to prepare food in healthy ways, and having that be continued across generations. And this disconnection with the idea that that kind of work that women have done traditionally is beneath us once we reach a certain educational and economic level. And that is highly problematic, because and I'm wondering, I haven't gotten your book yet, but I'm wondering if that's something that you're addressing, because I'm 4th generation apostolic Pentecostal. Okay, so like we put the fun in fundamentalism, okay? And I look at women, like my mother's 91 and teaches the same Sunday school class she joined when she was 14. And these women are extraordinarily healthy. They're not just alive, they're healthy and vibrant and active and engaged. And I'm not seeing that same kind of continuation. And I think some of that is because of not just racism, but patriarchy. This discounting the work of women to the point that women decide, I don't want to do that work anymore.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is highly problematic when we talk about food. And my last thing is, and I'm not a vegan, but I'm cool with it. Okay, I'm cool with veganism. And when we have group functions at church, I'm always the one who brings the quinoa salad with the black beans. And people are like, this ain't got no meat in it. I'm shocked. Yeah, it's really, you can have really good vegan food. What concerns me though is, again, this issue about how often I have seen white people and increasingly Black people treat animals with a level of respect and consideration that they would never extend to Black people, right? They got little coats for the dog, and then the cat got cancer treatments and the whole nine. And meanwhile, you can walk past human children who don't have enough to eat, who are not adequately clothed, and you're okay with that.
Yes, no, you have said a lot that I want to respond to. So first, I should let you know, I have been to your garden. This was when I was I've been to MSTO a few times. I've been to Delaware, I've been to your garden. I met your son. He's in one of the classes I taught. So yes, I'm very familiar with your work. So a couple of things I want to share briefly. Among the challenges I think we are confronted with as Americans, but particularly American women and women of color especially, is this notion of viewing cooking as a chore, right? This began really marketing, in the 40s and 50s, where women are being told, hey, you're going to go into the workforce. Now you don't have time to cook. So let's put it in the microwave and this other kind of stuff, right? So this is a part of big agriculture in the way they market food. And it's seen as a class issue, right? Once you get to a certain class, you shouldn't have to cook anymore, right? And we've lost a sense of identity that's steeped in our foods. And so one of the things I argue for and I talk about in the book, and I do talk about this in chapter 1 especially, is the importance of storytelling to recapture the imagination around cooking. And so when I cook, and I try to find some images, I have images of here, but I'm not really functional ones, of me and my son, who's only 2.5, helping me cook. I talk to him the whole time. Like, he loves to season stuff. He likes to do the things he can do. But I tell stories, and that's what my grandma did. And I didn't and my grandma had a stroke, so she couldn't talk most of her life, right? In that kind of way in which we formally think of talking, but she made sounds and grunts and had her recipe cards that she still had written before she had a stroke. In her own distinct way, she was telling me stories about why she did and why she ate the way she ate. And so I'm trying to pass on that tradition to my son. And that I think is important with regards to kind of reclaiming the kitchen, not as a space of this chore, but this sacred space where we, grow together as a community and become to know each other and who we are. I have found, I agree with you, some older Black women who are among the most healthiest people I know, who eat, but don't talk about it. They use the same words we use right now. So like I know Black women, older Black women who wouldn't say they're vegetarian, but they don't eat meat because those terms are wrapped up for them so much in whiteness. So they just don't say it, right? And again, these things I think have been passed down about the ways you eat to survive and flourish. And that knowledge, to your point, has been lost. And so among the other challenges we have, and that's part of the reason I lean deeply into African history, is to say, this isn't about a class issue or trying to move yourself up. This is about developing a deep understanding of our ancestry, what's in our bones. We can't escape this. And the idea of trying to escape it really is playing into the hands of a colonizer, basically. And so I frame it like that. I'm like, this is an anti-racist response, right? If you want to actually flourish as a people, if you want to support your community, if you want to be able to live in that kind of way, then we have to embrace these practices. And so I talk about cooking as a spiritual practice in the text. And I believe that's one of the things we have to do. The last thing I'll say is about the animals. My wife actually is a veterinary oncologist, interestingly. So she deals with people who want to spend a bunch of money on their animals. What I would say is, this is the way trauma gets played out. It bothers me living in San Diego because we have a huge homelessness problem, because there's a lot of soldiers who suffer from PTSD, right? Who are homeless because even though they have access to money, and San Diego is actually tends to be more conservative than a lot of other parts of California. And you have conservative people who are quote unquote pro-military that allow these people, right? That don't create the systems that can help them get on the street. And so coming to a place where I didn't grow up with homelessness around me that I really knew, to see it, it aggravates me to the extent that you're talking about. And so one of the challenges we have is not only we live in a space and society that's desensitized us to those kinds of things and detached us and alienated us from a sense of self. So that's where I talk about theological anthropology so much. What does it mean to be human? And how can we learn, once we learn to love ourselves and our own faults and our own insecurities in the ways in which we know we need God to love us, that opens us up to genuinely love others. And it's kind of radical self-love. People think it's like easy, because they're not talking about just loving the stuff that you like. You gotta love the parts of you that you really don't want anybody else to know. And when you love yourself in that kind of way, you develop a kind of security in who you are that opens you up to loving others without judging them in the kinds of ways that we often do. So Paul, and no, I admire your work, just so you know, from afar. Like, so keep up the good work. And thank you for the amazing questions. And thank you all for the comments too. I know we have to wrap up, but I do want to say, if any of you have any other questions, if you want to send me an email or anything like that, definitely let me know. I'll be more than willing to set up a Zoom call or something like that, I thought, with one of y'all. And I've really, really enjoyed this time. And this is a part of the reason why in my bones, I feel like I know at some point in my life, I'm going to move back to the South, because it's just my people. These are my people. And it's hard I love California. I mean, I'll be honest with you, the weather out here though, man, like it's like 75 degrees already. And I'm like, yeah, I go to the beach almost every day. It's just the challenge I have.
Wow. Well, Dr. Carter, we thank you so much. This has been time well spent. We appreciate your sacrifice of time, and thank you for everything that you have shared with us. As you see in the comments, so many things have resonated with people today. You have opened up our eyes to so many things, and we know that this conversation is going to continue within our connections, and we wish we had more time that we could just spend the next 30 minutes or even an hour talking about this, because there are so many layers to it, and you have just shared so much. And so I want to end with this, and really it is sort of where you take us at the end, where you talk about food, deserts, and desserts. And you talk about the peach cobbler. And you give this recipe for a peach crisp. And you say here that in some ways, eating dessert always signals the ends of your time with family and friends, and that in some ways it encourages the reflective response to reflect on the time spent with loved ones and to savor the sweetness of their company. So I want to say to you that we appreciate the time that was spent here in this place, and that we savor the sweetness of your company, and that you have been engaged with us in this space. And so again, my friends, if you have not yet purchased this book, please go out today to your local independent store if you've got one in your area. The Spirit of Soul Food, Race, Faith, and Food Justice. You have heard from the author yourself. There is no reason not to go out now and get this book and to read it, highlight it. I mean, there is so much information in here and so much that we can take back and share in our respective areas and our circles. So thank you again, everyone. Thank you to Nathan Bradsfield, who has been working behind the scenes and who has helped to set this up. Nathan, we appreciate you and we thank you. And again, thank you everybody for being a part of this today. Dr. Carter, any final closing remarks or the benediction?
Thank you all for your time and your presence and your engagement and your amazing questions. This is what actually inspires me to keep doing the work that I'm doing. You know, I wouldn't do this if I didn't feel like this was, like I said, I call myself a practical theologian. That's why I still work in a church. So I'm not an ivory tower person. You know, I'm in the community, and this is what gives me life. This is what gives me hope. So go in peace, be surrounded with love and compassion. Allow that to fill your soul so that the work that you do, you know, is fulfilling and uplifting and living into the call that God has placed on all of us to be the people that God has called us to be. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day.